What if a single scoop of ice cream foreshadowed a family's annihilation? How could a simple pistachio become a symbol for murder? In August of 2018, Christopher Watts murdered his pregnant wife, Shanann, and their 2 daughters. Bella was only 4, and CeCe was only 3. It was a crime that stunned the nation. As investigators and internet sleuths search for answers, one theory has emerged that's equal parts dark irony and tragic allegory: Nutgate. Welcome to Timeless Mysteries. Please like and subscribe. Today we discuss a term that refers to a bitter family feud that unfolded just weeks before Chris Watts annihilated his entire family. This divide centered around CeCe's severe nut allergy and the tense confrontation between Shanann and CeCe Watts. Some believe it marked a turning point in Chris's unraveling. Others say it's nothing more than an internet-fueled conspiracy.
Yeah, I mean, nothing. Everybody's gonna have their own opinion on anything like this. I just want people to know that I want my family back. Like, I want them safe, and I want them here. Like, this house is not the same. I mean, last night was traumatic. Last night was, I can't really stay in this house again, like, with nobody here.
Today, we look at all of the eerie details. Did Chris bring nuts to work on the day of the murders? Were Chris's parents conspiring against Shanann? Is Nutgate a key to understanding what pushed Chris over the edge, or is it just another desperate attempt to make sense out of the senseless? CeCe was extremely allergic to tree nuts. This was not a minor food sensitivity, but a documented medical condition so serious that CeCe was prescribed an EpiPen for emergencies. Everyone in the family knew of the allergy. Shanann had made a point to warn all of her friends and relatives to avoid giving CeCe anything containing nuts. This wasn't overprotectiveness on Shanann's part. It was literally life and death. Celeste had already experienced allergic reactions, and Shanann lived in constant vigilance to keep her toddler safe. Imagine the stress of parenting a child who could stop breathing from one wrong snack. Shanann, the ever-organized mother, even sent both her own mother and her mother-in-law, CeCe Watts, a list of approved nut-free foods before a planned summer trip in 2018. By all accounts, Shanann took CeCe's allergy with an utmost seriousness. Did everyone else? Tension brewed beneath the surface. The Watts family dynamic was already strained before any nut ever entered the picture. Shanann confided to friends that her mother-in-law, Cindy, had never liked her and often undermined her parenting. Indeed, it's noted in police discovery files that Chris's parents did not even intend his wedding to Shanann. That's a telling sign of long-standing rifts. On the other side, Cindy and Ronnie Watts, Chris's father, felt Shanann was too controlling of Chris and the kids. This was the powder keg, but who struck the match? In 2018, Shanann traveled from Colorado to North Carolina with Bella and CeCe to spend 5 weeks with extended family. Part of that trip included a visit to Cindy and Ronnie Watts' home. What happened during that visit has since been dubbed Nutgate. According to a detailed letter Shanann's friend later wrote to prosecutors, and it's now part of discovery, Shanann walked into her mother-in-law's kitchen to a horrifying sight. CeCe Watts was about to give the girls ice cream that contained nuts. Did Cindy forget about CeCe's allergy, or did she simply not believe the allergy was real? Shanann immediately asked if the ice cream had nuts. Cindy's reply was nonchalant, even defiant. Yes, just a little. To Shanann, this was not just a little of anything. It was her child's life. When Shanann snatched the bowl of ice cream away and said the girls couldn't eat it, Cindy persisted, trying to hand the bowls back to the toddlers. Incredibly, Cindy told the little girls, "Oh, your mommy doesn't know what she's talking about. This ice cream won't hurt you." It's hard to overstate Shanann's fury and fear in that moment. Her mother-in-law was directly contradicting her and downplaying a well-documented lethal allergy. Was this simply a grandmother in denial or a more malicious act of defiance? The confrontation exploded. Shanann, voice raised and shaking with anger, accused Cindy, "You're trying to kill my child." Shanann later confided in friends how dangerous and deliberate it felt to her. The scene devolved into a shouting match right in front of the wide-eyed children, who were so scared that Shanann's younger nephew told Bella to hide, fearing that they might never get to come back to Grandma's house again. In the heat of this argument, Cindy's daughter, Chris's sister, came into the kitchen and astonishingly set a bowl of actual nuts down on the table right within CeCe's reach. Shanann snapped, asking why on earth she would do that. The sister coolly responded, "We always have nuts on the kitchen table." It was as if the family was thumbing their noses at Shanann's warnings. At this point, Shanann had seen enough. Shaking with tears of anger, she gathered her daughters and abruptly left her in-laws' house, calling the environment unsafe. She then called her own father to come pick her and the girls up immediately, refusing to stay another minute under Cindy's roof. In the aftermath of this ice cream altercation, emotions ran hot on all sides. Shanann blasted her mother-in-law on Facebook, venting in a public post about a caregiver endangering a child with allergies. She did so without naming Cindy directly, but it was obvious to those who knew Shanann who she was referencing. In private, she texted Chris that his mother was reckless with Celeste's life and that Cindy just wants to upset her. Shanann told friends she would never allow Cindy to see the kids again if she could help it. In her view, Cindy had betrayed the most basic trust in keeping her grandchildren safe. From Cindy's perspective, Shanann was overreacting and attacking her over a trivial issue. Cindy reportedly dismissed Shanann's concerns as overprotectiveness, insisting that Shanann was just being dramatic about the allergy. Was Cindy truly ignorant of the gravity of anaphylaxis, or was there an element of passive aggression in her actions?
It was always a little strange that she always said a lot of things about Chris in front of me that I didn't like.
Perhaps she felt that Shanann's strict rules were a challenge to her own authority as a grandmother and rebelled in a dangerously careless way, regardless of motive. The result was a total relational breakdown. Shanann left the Watts' home furious, and in the days that followed, she cut off contact with her in-laws entirely. The schism was painfully apparent a few days later at Celeste's birthday party. CeCe turned 3 on July 17th, 2018. While still in North Carolina, despite being invited, Cindy and Ronnie Watts did not attend their granddaughter's birthday. They were effectively uninvited in Shanann's mind, and they apparently felt it best to stay away after the blow-up. When Cindy mailed Celeste's present to the house instead, Shanann had a friend return it to sender, unopened. By late July, with the birthday snub and the Facebook jabs, the Nutgate feud had solidified into 2 entrenched camps. Shanann was infuriated and done trying with her in-laws. The Watts grandparents felt vilified and refused to apologize. At the time of the murders in mid-August, this conflict was still unresolved. The families were in a Cold War, with Chris Watts stuck precariously in the middle, or was he? In the weeks after Nutgate, the Watts family was fractured like never before. Shanann, still on the East Coast with the girls, vented continuously about the incident. In texts to friends, and likely in calls to Chris as well, she demanded that Chris stand up to his parents. By all accounts, Chris outwardly agreed that his mom had truly screwed up in a huge way. He seemed to support his wife, saying he understood why she was upset and that he wouldn't let his mom's irresponsibility slide. But was Chris just appeasing Shanann to keep the peace? Inside him, a very different reaction may have been brewing: resentment. When Chris flew to North Carolina in the first week of August to join Shanann and the girls, he did not even go see his own parents. In fact, according to Chris's later statements, after the nut incident, he didn't speak to his parents at all until August 6th. For 3 long weeks, he had zero contact with them, something that was unprecedented in his life. Shanann explicitly told Chris he was not allowed to talk to his parents as punishment for what had happened. This put Chris in an agonizing bind. By his own admission, his father Ronnie was his hero. Being cut off from his dad made Chris feel as if he had lost him. This was all while he was also grappling with the guilt of his loyalty to Shanann. To many observers, Shanann's reaction was understandable given her child's safety was at stake. But to Chris, a man who rarely stood up to his parents or his wife, this ultimatum from Shanann was likely a source of intense internal conflict. Did he blame Shanann for forcing the estrangement, or blame his mother for causing the crisis? Probably both. We can only imagine the churn of anger, guilt, and confusion inside Chris as he pretended everything was fine. There were other stressors on Chris Watts that summer, some hidden, some visible. Shanann would later recall in anguished letters she wrote to him that Chris had become cold and emotionally distant about 5 weeks before the murders, which roughly coincides with the Nutgate fight, and something else that Shanann didn't fully know about at the time: Chris's affair. In early July 2018, Chris began seeing a co-worker, Nichol Kessinger, back home in Colorado, while Shanann was across the country. Chris was essentially living a double life. By day, the devoted dad FaceTiming his daughters. By night, going out on dates and trysts with his new lover. Shanann sensed something was off. She even told a friend she worried Chris might be having a midlife crisis or an affair. Yet she also offered another possible explanation for his aloofness. She theorized that Chris was upset with her over this rift with his parents. In her mind, Nutgate was a major reason Chris seemed angry or withdrawn. Shanann was grasping for any reason to explain why her once loving husband suddenly barely touched her and seemed eager to avoid her. "He hasn't cuddled me or really kissed me since I got back," she texted a friend. This was not long before the murders. She was partly right. The feud was affecting Chris, but she didn't know the half of it. Back in Colorado, Chris's co-workers also noticed changes in him during this period. The normally cheerful, laid-back man who proudly showed off photos of Bella and Celeste began to morph into someone irritable and sullen. One coworker, a contractor named Brian Spence, later said things changed and that he watched Chris get more and more unhappy with his life. He grew combative, short-tempered, even snapping at people for small things. Minor workplace annoyances seemed to put Chris into a mild rage. A sharp departure from his previously easygoing persona. To those around him, it was as if some internal pressure was building up and eroding Chris's polite facade. Could the stress of Nutgate have been one of those pressures? It certainly added to the perfect storm. Chris was juggling a wife desperate to save their marriage, an affair with a partner pushing him to leave his family, financial troubles mounting at home, and now he's being cut off from his own parents, whom he still loved, because of a blowout fight between the two most important women in his life. Psychologically, Chris was a man torn in two directions. In North Carolina, during the final week of the trip, instead of bringing his wife and parents together to reconcile, Chris avoided the conflict altogether. Notably, his parents confronted him about another apprehensive behavior when they finally got to see him. They had noticed Chris was constantly texting someone during his brief visit with them, raising their suspicions that he had someone else in his life. They weren't wrong. Those secret texts were to Nichol Kessinger. So now, from his parents' vantage, Shanann had turned Chris against them, and Chris might be cheating. The entire Watts family system was dysfunctionally twisted by miscommunication and mistrust. Chris's response was characteristically passive. He said little. He avoided confrontations. He just quietly fumed. One telling detail from his later FBI interview, Chris said that when Nutgate happened, he wished he had handled it differently. That he should have stopped everything right then and there with Nichol Kessinger and concentrated on the one thing that truly mattered in his life more than anything else, fixing the relationship with Shanann and his family. In hindsight, he recognized it as an escalation point. He even referred to it by Shanann's term, Nutgate, revealing how prominently it loomed in his memory. Yet in the moment, instead of fixing anything, Chris shut down and drifted further away. On the surface, he played the agreeable husband. Beneath, he was a volcano with conflicting loyalties, anger at being controlled, and yearning for freedom. Among the peculiar details that true crime sleuths have zeroed in on is the claim that shortly before the murders, Chris Watts began bringing nuts, yes, actual nuts, to his workplace. At first glance, this might sound trivial, but in light of the Nutgate incident, that detail takes on a potentially symbolic weight. Why would a father of an extremely allergic child ever risk having nut residue on his clothes or in his lunch kit, knowing that if it's on his fingers, it could trigger his daughter's death? Some have argued that this was Chris's quiet way of rebelling against Shanann's stringent allergy rules, and by extension, rebelling against his family responsibilities. Was Chris effectively saying, "I don't care anymore," through this small act of defiance? Or was it merely that with Shanann and the kids out of town for weeks, he indulged in some peanut snacks at work, not thinking much of it? The timing is intriguing. Shanann and the girls were away all of July in 2018. So Chris had been living a bachelor life, dieting, exercising, having an affair, and perhaps eating foods that were forbidden at home for safety reasons. He knew full well how dangerous nuts were to CeCe. He had explicitly told Nichol Kessinger that CeCe's allergies were so severe that she needed an EpiPen, and that even a little bit of nut could send her to the hospital. So if he was casually eating nut-containing foods, it suggests a startling lack of concern. Was Chris's casual approach to nuts a subconscious snub to his family's needs? It's worth noting that Shanann was an attentive enough mother that she likely enforced protocols like no peanut butter in the house or shower to change clothes if you eat something with nuts. Chris flouting those rules at work, outside of her watch, might have given him a secret sense of autonomy. It might also hint that he sided internally with his mother's belief that the allergy was overblown. Remember, Cindy felt CeCe's allergy wasn't very serious, and some speculate that Chris had, over the years, absorbed that dismissive attitude when Shanann wasn't around. Could he have been telling his parents that Shanann exaggerated CeCe's allergy to appease them? One Reddit-fueled theory even postulates that Chris occasionally downplayed the allergy to his parents, possibly hoping they'd accidentally expose CeCe, and what? That she'd outgrow it, or worse, that she'd have a reaction that would remove one of Chris's obstacles from his life. That particular conjecture veers into extremely dark territory, and it is not supported by concrete evidence. It's largely online sleuth speculation. However, it shows how every little action of Chris's is scrutinized for hidden meaning. In truth, we can't know for sure why Chris had nuts with him at work, if he indeed did have them at work. What we do know is that this was a man who, by early August of 2018, was acting very differently from his formerly devoted dad persona. He was spending his workdays texting his mistress on a secret calculator app, researching wedding ring prices, and avoiding calls from his increasingly anxious wife. In that context, munching on peanuts or protein bars with nuts during work is a minor transgression. Yet symbolically, it aligns with a larger pattern of Chris shedding the rules and roles that had defined him as a husband and a father. It was as if he were erasing Shanann's influence bit by bit, ignoring her calls, rejecting Thrive supplements, the dietary products she sold, eating foods that would have upset her, and so on. Each small act, like bringing nuts into a formerly nut-free zone, could be seen as an unconscious step toward his ultimate unthinkable act of erasing his entire family. It's chilling to consider. Were these nut incidents red flags of Chris's growing estrangement and negligence, or just coincidences seized upon in hindsight? The question lingers without a clear answer. Whenever a case as horrific as the Watts murder captures the public eye, it spawns a multitude of conspiracy theories. Nutgate, being such a dramatic and unusual story, naturally becomes a focal point for these theories. In the court of public opinion, especially on forums like Reddit, YouTube, and Facebook groups, Nutgate took on a life of its own. Some internet sleuths elevated this incident from a family quarrel to the linchpin of the entire crime. Others spun elaborate conjectures around the roles of Chris's parents, Cindy and Ronnie Watts, in the events leading up to and after the murders. One popular narrative suggests that Nutgate was the final nail in the coffin for Chris Watts' psyche, pushing him over the edge after years of feeling caught between his wife and his parents. This explosive fight might have been the point of no return. In support of this, we have Chris's own prison confession, where he admitted the Nutgate incident did impact him emotionally. When FBI agents bluntly asked if Nutgate contributed to his decision to annihilate his family, Chris conceded it was one of the reasons, if not the catalyst, that made him snap. We should note this was Chris's retrospective interpretation, and Chris has been known to embellish or shift blame. But this is a telling piece of information because he places so much weight upon it. True crime commenters have pointed out that Nutgate framed a narrative in Chris's mind, Shanann versus his family. It solidified the us or them ultimatum. Shanann herself, and her desperation to keep CeCe safe, told Chris that unless his parents acknowledged and apologized for what they did, they would never ever see their grandchildren again. Such a ban would deeply wound any devoted son, and Chris, instead of mitigating or finding some common ground, simply let the resentment fester. Why do so many people seize on this allergy feud as the key? Perhaps because it's a rare glimpse into the family's private discord shortly before the murders. It's human nature to seek a reason or a trigger in a crime that otherwise seems inexplicable. Nutgate provides a convenient storyline: overbearing wife, aggrieved husband, and meddling in-laws. It's a classic domestic tragedy brew. It also is disturbingly poetic in a morbid way. Something as innocent as an ice cream cone secretly laced with nuts, paralleling a family that looked picture perfect on the outside, but had noxiousness hidden beneath.
Shanann's pregnancy and was, what did Chris tell you about that? Was he excited?
No, I don't think he was. I think it was a shock to him. And he said that they have been talking about divorce, that they are not compatible anymore, and he was not happy anymore. And I finally thought, he's finally seen the light.
The drama is almost literary. As one podcast describes it, Shanann's visit to her in-laws was a total disaster, triggering a massive fight and continued division within the families, which some say was the final straw, the cause of her death. It's easy to see why imaginations run wild with this. Among the more extreme conspiracy theories, one posits Chris' parents themselves were involved in the crimes or their cover-up. Online, there are those who suspect Cindy and Ronnie either encouraged Chris in some way or helped him after the fact. Let's be clear, there is no evidence from law enforcement investigation that Chris Watts' parents had any direct involvement in the murders. They were in North Carolina when the killings in Colorado occurred. Police have never suggested any accomplices in their extensive 2,000-page discovery. Nevertheless, a toxic relationship between Shanann and her in-laws has led some to demonize Cindy and Ronnie, painting them as having hated Shanann enough to want her gone. It's true that Ronnie and Cindy, by their own words, did not approve of Shanann. They considered her bossy, controlling, and felt that Chris was henpecked. In fact, after the murders, when Chris initially lied and claimed Shanann had killed the girls, Ronnie Watts was quick to believe it. He even told detectives that maybe Shanann was unstable, citing, of all things, a bizarre Facebook photo Shanann had posted of a doll covered in a sheet, a child's prank that Shanann joked looked like Bella playing funeral. Ronnie suggested this was a sign Shanann might hurt the kids. This shows the depth of distrust and dislike Shanann's own in-laws harbored against her. It's not hard to see why. In some corners of the internet, people might imagine Cindy Watts' disdain for Shanann, and vice versa, could have translated into something sinister. Did Cindy intentionally give CeCe pistachio ice cream, hoping to provoke Shanann or even harm CeCe? Some believe so. Did she secretly encourage Chris to end the marriage at any cost? There's no recorded evidence of that, but conspiracies fill in those blanks. One theory has painted Nutgate as almost premeditated, that Cindy knew exactly what she was doing with the ice cream, aiming to create a rift that might break Chris and Shanann up. The idea that a grandmother would risk her grandchild's life to get back at her daughter-in-law is horrifying. Yet this case forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. Could Cindy have been that callous, or was she truly ignorant? Was Cindy aware of such malice? In truth, we cannot put Cindy on trial here. She was not charged with murder. The more plausible reality is that Cindy did not believe the allergy was that dangerous, perhaps thinking, like she said, Shanann was just being dramatic, and thus she saw no real risk in offering that ice cream. Her comments, "Mommy is overreacting," suggest dismissal, not intent to harm. That said, to Shanann, this was attempted murder. These wildly divergent perspectives fueled endless debate, and still do. Importantly, while these conspiracy theories are intriguing like soap opera meets crime thriller way, they remain speculative. Another line of speculation focuses on Shanann herself. Incredibly, some detractors, many influenced by misogynistic or misinformed interpretations, have claimed Shanann exaggerated CeCe's allergy to control the grandparents or even garner attention. They point to Shanann's own social media showing her feeding the kids food that may contain nuts. Examples are certain Thrive protein bars, or favorite cereals that had trace warnings. Insinuating that she wasn't consistent, a fringe conspiracy even asserts that CeCe was never really allergic at all, that Shanann made it all up to isolate Chris from his family. This is not supported by medical facts. CeCe had been tested and had an EpiPen injector prescribed to her by a real doctor. All of this veers into blaming the victim, and it goes even further than that. It goes into cruel absurdity, essentially accusing a murder victim of committing her own crime against herself. We must be cautious not to indulge these baseless narratives. However, the mere existence of these claims show how polarizing the Watts case is. In death, Shanann was not spared harsh judgment. The Nutgate has become ammunition in these blame games. In analyzing why these narratives emerge, we should consider the human psyche in response to senseless tragedy. People look for patterns and villains beyond the obvious. It's easier to believe there was a broader conspiracy or a long-brewing family plot than to accept the banality of evil, that a smiling, seemingly henpecked man simply decided one day to strangle his pregnant wife and then smother his 2 children so that he could start fresh with his mistress, Nichol Kessinger. Nutgate offers an almost Shakespearean subplot to grasp onto: meddling in-laws, family betrayal, a man torn between two families. It provides a motive rooted in family loyalty and long-term resentment, rather than the chillingly cold motive of lust for a new woman and freedom from fatherhood. In truth, the murders likely had multiple motivators. Chris's desire to be with Nichol Kessinger unfettered, financial strain, his own personality disorder traits, and yes, a growing hatred, resentment toward Shanann, who he began to see as an obstacle in his new life. The Allergy feud fed into that resentment, making Shanann appear as someone who took away his parents and isolated him further. Nutgate is one puzzle piece in the psychological mosaic of this case, but because it's such a vivid and unusual piece, it attracts outsized attention. As responsible analysts, we should examine it critically. It matters, but it doesn't explain everything. So stepping back, what does the Nutgate saga tell us about Chris Watts' psychological state in the lead up to the murders? Criminologists and psychologists who study family annihilators have identified certain patterns. Often these individuals are outwardly nonviolent, even passive, with deep wells of repressed emotion. They tend to be conflict avoidant and image conscious until something causes them to explosively snap. Dr. Neil Websdale, an expert on familicide, notes that many such killers feel a loss of control in their lives and need to reassert power in the most drastic way. So you tell me, I could go on and on about this, and we still won't know what really happened. Does the Nutgate theory truly explain why Chris annihilated his entire family? Not entirely. No single factor ever can, but our analysis shows that the Nutgate was far from a trivial spat. It was a pivotal event that magnified the fissures in an already unstable family structure. It gave shape to Chris's brewing resentment and perhaps greased the slippery slope of his dehumanization of his wife and children. It also provided a narrative for observers and for Chris himself to latch onto, a way to rationalize the irrational. We must be careful not to blame Shanann for Chris Watts' choices. Shanann did not cause her own murder by arguing with her mother-in-law. Cindy did not make her son a killer by feeding ice cream to his daughter. Whatever symbolism one finds in the Nutgate story, the fact remains that Chris is a murderer. And if there is somebody else to blame, you'll notice that I haven't mentioned her name very much in this story. So for those of you who want something great to talk about, all we can do is sift through this evidence and learn from the mistakes that have been made in the past and possibly not just survive, but thrive. As always, be kind, stay vigilant, and always question the truth. I'll catch you in the next video.